Okay, so today we are talking about rec impacts to soils. On Monday of this week, we were talking about just kind of soils as a recreation resource. And kind of the main thought there was the soils at your park, and indeed every microtopological feature of your park is going to have a slightly different soil lens, or just patch of soil in that spot relative to even the other spots around it inside that site, inside your national park. So this is a very, very unique and localized resource in terms of its dynamics. So for example, if we have a patch of soil on top of a mountain, and then we go 500 meters to the side where it's a very steep slope of that mountain, the soil characteristics and dynamics at the top of the mountain and on that steep slope are going to be wildly different just based on a 500 meter difference laterally on the map. And of course, the functional difference there is topographical, meaning a very high slope difference or contrast between those two. And so we had sort of the informal assignment of taking a look at your park's geologic map and potentially a sort of a coarse soils map. This might be available on something like a topo map, for example. So patches of open sand, for example, are going to be pretty different in their management and needs and responses to human impact pressures versus sections on a topo map that are just colored green or hatched blue-green for like swampy, saturated, or hydric soils, for example. And those dynamics are going to be wildly different in how we manage those various spots. So today let's get into what are the actual rec impacts and dynamics of those impacts. I apologize, I'm not quite sure why the projector isn't running right now, but the lamp is on, the connection is live, we're just not seeing anything. It's very sad, kind of embarrassing, but we move on. All right, so the function of soil through time is going to be one of really pretty continuous change. If nothing else, if they're in the absence of any other pressures on it, soil is going to generate in most places. So in the absence of any kind of soil transposition processes, like erosion or other kinds of sediment transport, we're going to have that slow chemical weathering process, those physical weathering processes up in cryospheric areas, for example, so ice fields, ice flows, glaciers, that kind of thing. And we are constantly building up that reserve of that resource. Now, it happens on such a slow time scale that we don't generally consider soils to be a renewable resource in most ecosystems. In very fast composting systems or very fast biological turnover systems, we can consider like certain kinds of swamps, for example, or river deltas. We would consider those soils to be somewhat more renewable. But for the most part, when we have soil erosion on a trail, for example, or in the middle of your campsites, we're treating that as a lasting and basically permanent impact, because in order to get things back to the status quo, the way they were before that recreation impact in that spot, we're going to have to bring in borrow pits or dump truck loads of soil. So a borrow pit is a hole you dig in the ground out of sight, but near the site where you need to add soil to. And you transpose the soil from the borrow pit to the spot. And it is absolutely mindless, back-breaking, sweaty, dumb labor. Like, there's nothing glamorous about repairing soils and so forth. So to the extent that we can improve or protect the morale of your trail crews when you're managing a national park, for example, by preventing soil erosion in the first place or aggressively addressing it where you see it happening, right? That's going to be better for everybody, including the soil. So let's talk through a soil kind of the self-reinforcing process or cycle of soil impacts as a function of forest and outdoor recreation and its management. And this is going to be kind of our organizing cycle for today. Now, this is one of those self-reinforcing or positive feedback cycles. So So every time we go around this circle, say once a year, for example, right? Spring, summer, autumn, winter, back to spring. Now in year 2, that cycle is going to be a little bit more productive, or it's going to start a little earlier, or it's going to run a little harder, or it's going to cycle a little faster, and so forth. That's all a positive reinforcement cycle, self-reinforcing cycle. Okay, so let's start with our soil profile, a column. We have the O horizons, so coarse organic material, fine or pulverized organic materials, and then typically, not all soils have all of these strata or layers, but typically we'll have O, A, sometimes E, B, C, and then down to parent material or bedrock. So partially decomposed bedrock, soil particles that are migrating upwards in the column, chemical reactions happening, soil particles migrating downward in the column, and soil particles being added to the column, respectively, in these various layers from parent bedrock on up to O. All right, so picture an arbitrary spot in your mind's eye in your national park, just way off in the forest somewhere. There's no trails running through there, there's no campsites, there's no off-road motorcycles through that spot. It's just off in the middle of the woods, or out in the middle of the prairie or the tundra if you're managing a park in Alaska, or wherever else you are managing it. Okay, so an undisturbed soil regime. We have first organic matter pulverization. So, on day 1 of adding recreation dynamics to the soil generation, propagation, translocation, etc. dynamics, the moment we start adding humans to this process and not taking into account anything else that is covering our soil resources, like trees and other plants, the first thing that happens is organic matter pulverization. We directly, physically, and mechanically, that is by stepping or rolling tires or punching hooves across that top, soft, organic, coarse, armoring layer of soil, or energy ablative layer of soil. So ablative is a fancy word for a way to dissipate energy safely. Okay? When a car is in a high-speed collision, right, we have crumple zones, and we have essentially parts of the vehicle that are engineered to shatter and transfer most of the kinetic energy that's being imparted to the vehicle, not to the driver's cranium as kinetic energy transfer, but instead moving that kinetic energy off into shattered parts of the vehicle that just fly off at extremely high speed and eat up most of that energy. Excuse me. So ablation is one energy transfer process, and the dead leaves, the bits of stick, the dead bugs, whatever, like the coarse organic material that is topmost on the soil because it's been deposited there this season or last season, that kind of thing. That's what's happening when we walk across those things. So organic matter pulverization is essentially immediate. And the way that this looks is if we're walking around in Thompson Woods and we're looking at the leaf litter, instead of having sort of a loose pile of leaves, the leaves where people have been walking or where deer have been bedding or what have you, this can be a natural process as well as an anthropogenic one. We have the leaves laid flat. And some of those leaves are not whole leaves anymore, they are parts of a leaf because leaves are dry and friable or friable. They're dry and crumply and they break apart. All right, so that breaking apart is a transfer of kinetic energy from your boot sole or your wheel or whatever. That's the pulverization process, again from the Latin for to dust. From there, because we now have lighter weight, smaller but also very low bulk density, organic instead of like stone particles, right? This organic dust or powder is very lightweight. It's very easily transportable. So we have organic matter transport, but within the context of the spot where somebody's walking or the spot where somebody's putting down that tent, it is organic matter removal. Even if that removal is only 50 feet to the side, functionally speaking, for that spot in the soil, that other stuff that's been moved away doesn't exist anymore. It's outside of the context of where the impact is. All right, so organic matter transport or removal. And the way that this looks out in a spot like Thompson Woods is all around we have living plants, we have trees, we have shrubs, we have forest floor forbs or other herbaceous materials and non-woody vegetation. And then below that, lots and lots of leaf litter and so forth. And in a spot where somebody is walking, in between patches of leaves that are laid flat, that organic matter pulverization step, we have spots where those leaves, or that leaf debris or that leaf powder has been scuffed away, or blown away, or washed away. Okay? This all can happen in a matter of hours, right? So if SIU in its wisdom one day wanted to have the next fire festival, or the next Burning Man, or Coachella in Thompson Woods, we would expect within that day tremendous amounts of at least this stage of the soil impact process to be happening basically immediately. Right, and we can all see that how that happens, right? Leaves are not particularly resistant to utter destruction at the hands of humankind, which is a great punk band name. Kind of long, but anyway, Beartooth is probably more succinct. Anyway, but we can see how, like, a couple of visitors being thoughtless, or a couple of visitors, running dirt bikes through an area that's not designed to handle dirt bikes, for example, like a couple of people in a couple of hours can leave a season worth of impact. Okay? And we'll see how, in these subsequent steps, how removing this, so powdering up, destroying this top layer of organic armor for the forest floor, and then removing that powdered up or shredded armor, how it makes these subsequent steps much more easy, much more severe, much faster in subsequent years. So if we're running Coachella and Thompson Woods over and over, well then we need to expect to run this clock, this cycle, forward over and over. All right, so next we have upper strata compaction and subsidence. All right, so talked about subsidence on Monday. Subsidence, so compaction, is a mechanical process by which the soil bulk density characteristic, the amount of matter in a given unit of volume. So 1 cubic meter of soil weighs several tons. If you took a bunch of extra soil and piston rammed or mechanically compacted that 1 meter of soil and added more soil to it and compacted that so that all this new material still fit within that original 1 cubic meter, well, you might have an extra ton of material in that space because we've taken all of that empty or void space, that pore space that normally holds gases or water, and we've filled that in with that stone, that organic material in the form of all these soil particles. All right, so compaction is that process. And every time you step on a spot in the soil or drive your tractor or your combine harvester or anything over soil, we're pushing, we're squishing some of those pore spaces apart. So the analog for your modeling clay here in the classroom today is that this is air-whipped clay, right? This is very, very low bulk density versus like a kaolin clay, which is is dense on the order of stone, right? So stoneware, crockpot, stuff like that, ceramics. So if we took this stuff and we mushed it really, really hard, we could squeeze those air pores out, and you wouldn't have near as much volume of it, but you'd have the same amount of mass. And so the same amount of mass and less volume is mathematically equivalent to more mass in the same volume. So you're increasing the bulk density either way. And compaction is exactly that, right? So the outcome of compaction, without adding more soil to the system, because in fact we are removing that lightweight, low bulk density stuff in the previous step, is that we are pressing that soil down. We're compacting away all of those pore spaces, and now we have the same amount of matter occupying less volume, higher bulk density, and those pore spaces are gone. So the next step in the process is going to reflect what happens when you have that loss of pore space. Okay, so the loss and pulverization of litter is going to be a very rapid process. Because, let me back up a couple steps here. This first step, because this is very quick to happen with intense use, we can actually use that to our advantage. Earlier in the semester when we were talking about when do we concentrate use into an area and just let it become beat to death so that everything else is totally untouched, right? That concentration versus dispersal strategy. This is the direct physical relationship of why we say that, why that's a valid management strategy. And the contrapositive of it is with very light or occasional or dispersed use. If a single person instead of a Coachella worth of people is walking across Thompson Woods, yeah, you're breaking up, you're compacting, you're causing these processes, but it's so light relative to the biological activity, relative to the mechanical freeze-thaw, the freeze-thaw, the frost thrusting of the soil and breaking it apart, and detritivores moving through the soil and so forth, that a single footprint is going to be regenerated very, very quickly. Certainly within the order of a single season, but possibly within the order of about a week or so with typical weather cycling, for example, right? So if you have 1 million people walking through an area, it's going to be super compacted and just beat to death. If you have one person walking through that space and then a rainstorm through there, well, the direct mechanical impact of those individual raindrops hitting that spot might be enough to sort of blast that soil back out into a more loose, more natural setup. Okay? So, that's okay. So we have a lot going on with all of these. The organic matter and transport removal step, we'll go back to that one real quickly as well. This is rain, this is wind, this is accelerated decomposition based on if you are doing the mulching up step that the beetles and the worms and the fungi don't have to do anymore. That just saves that step, and they can get right into the nutrient assimilation and extraction process. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, so moving on. With the increased bulk density, from all this compaction we've been talking about, we're going to have increased bulk density, but that means less volume. That is what subsidence means. And we're also going to have decreased soil macroporosity. All right, and macropores are the holes, the void spaces, the open to flowing areas between individual soil particles that are big enough to facilitate water flow. Is one way to define what a macropore is for our purposes. Okay? And with the decreased macroporosity thing, that's going to also be proportional to decreased infiltration. Okay? So we get a bunch of rain in this trampled out spot, and there's no macropores for that rain to soak in. So it stays on the top of the soil in the form of a puddle or a stream, like an ephemeral stream bed, like a temporary, seasonal, intermittently flowing water feature, and so forth. Okay? And we can also get this in other ways, like at the bottom of a valley, but if we have puddles on top of the mountain, well, that's something else, right? We got to deal with that. Let's see. We'll skip through some of these things. I apologize. We have a bunch of photos of this stuff, but it's nice out today, so I'm racing through this so we can go outside and see what this stuff actually looks like. All right, from here we get a bunch of water trapped at the surface. It's no longer able to go down into like deep water aquifer recharge. It's no longer able to flow sideways through the soil matrix for things like eventually popping out in the bottom of a stream bed for hyporheic stream recharge. For those of you who are water hydrologists, don't ever say the phrase water hydrologist in front of Schoonover or Williard. It will make them get really itchy. Water hydrologist. That's like saying I'm a human medicine doctor, or like I'm a bendy body gymnast or something. I don't know. It's redundant. That's what I'm saying. Okay. So with this decreased soil macroporosity and infiltration, we get increased overland flow to the extent that the spot where your visitors have trampled something kind of to this point, if it's not perfectly mathematically flat or normal or orthogonal to the Earth's gravitational field, it's going to flow somewhere. Even if it's just to the low side of the puddle, it's going to flow there. All right? So, increased overland flow. And with increased overland flow, we have to ask the question of, okay, but how much of an increase are we talking about? So a swamp, a hydric, saturated soil forest ecosystem, or a marsh, so a saturated, swampy, swamp-like grassland ecosystem, those are flowing systems. It's not that water just flows to there and just stops, but it's like a very slow flowing river in the shape of a pond or a marsh or swamp or whatever. So we get flow rates on the order of, in a swamp, something like, it might be a centimeter an hour or a few millimeters a day for a very, very slow flowing system, right? But the water is moving. There's a net migration of water molecules and all the stuff that's dissolved in that matrix of water, or that solution of water, over time. All right. Now, for us, for our recreation purposes, where we are creating overland flow as a function of impacting soils by walking in a place too much, driving in a place too much, or camping in a place too much, or in the wrong way, this increased overland flow is going to look a lot more like a stream. Because remember, with walking in a trail, a visitor-created trail, a social trail, informal trail, lots of different names for them, people's choice trails, desire paths. Oh my gosh, just get shivers thinking about it. Synonyms. Whew. Anyway, it's not just this one sort of square meter that people have trampled and caused subsidence and increased bulk density and decreased infiltration and increased overland flow. It's the next square meter and the next square meter after that in the next square meter. Thank you, Ryan. And so on and so forth. It's a sequence of these. It's spatially linked or topologically linked impacts. So the water is going to tend to flow from high potential to low potential, to low kinetic energy to high kinetic energy. And this gives us the need to ask, okay, not only is this water flowing, but how hard is it flowing? How fast is it flowing? Water is a tremendously destructive force when it is moving. So think about, for anybody who's ever gone to like a mass protest or something like that, and the police come out and they bring out the riot cannons. Anybody know what a riot cannon is? It's a modified fire engine pump truck where they're not hooking hoses to this truck-sized water impeller system. It's a pintle-mounted gun basically, and you just hose people off at very high velocity, and you see like these, these pasty protesters. This is not fun to be on the receiving end of, but like you can't stand there and be like, what do we want? XYZ. When do we want it? Now. And you can't just stand there. As you're getting fire hose, you get flushed down the street, like thrown off of your feet. That's the kinetic energy power of water to do work. The work in this case is flinging bodies. Okay? So the same thing is true, albeit generally at a lower scale, but in a flash flood setting, a much higher scale than a riot engine. So with increased overland flow and kinetic energy, our trapped at the surface water now is doing work. And what that work does is pick up, scrape up, or liberate softened, because it's muddy, the water's trapped at the surface, the soft, muddy soil particles at the surface there, and carries those. As long as that water's moving, it's going to carry particles, right? So maybe the water is tumbling along this trail that visitors have created, and it hits a root and starts to, slow down. The transport capacity of water for soil particles is entirely, purely devoted to the speed of that water, right? So kinetic energy gives the water speed. Speed gives the water the characteristic ability to pick up and keep suspended and moving soil particles. When you hit a root or a check dam or a water bar, anybody know what a water bar is along a trail? Right, we've all tripped on those. Okay, so we'll talk about some other alternatives to those. The water slows down when it hits that obstruction. It drops those soil particles and raises the floor on that part of the puddle. But more water's coming in behind it and dropping soil particles. And then eventually that speed bump for the water is not a speed bump, and now the water's flowing right over it, and it's continuing to march particles forward. Okay? So this is a fascinating process to a soil nerd like me, but we also have what's called sheet erosion. So you guys mostly all taking soils, is that right? All right, so we all know what sheet erosion is? Moving on. So the next step here is gully erosion. Now, gully erosion is what we tend to pay attention to as trail crews, because gully erosion is what you can see long after the rainy season and the use season, which may or may not be coincident. They are linked to each other through this cycle. It's what you can see as you're walking along the trail. Oh, this trail is eroded. I can tell because of the way it is. Look, I see roots growing out of the trail. No. So we are removing the soil particles around those roots and exposing those roots, either through sheet or rill or gully or channelized or concentrated flow path erosion. Okay, so rill, gully, concentrated flow path, channelized, all the same thing. So in agriculture, we call this a concentrated flow path on a farm field. If you're European, you might call it a rill. If you're a water hydrologist, I'm sorry, it's channelized. If you are a recreation ecologist, we'll call this gully erosion. And so, again, we'll look at some examples of this outside. I have so many awesome photos of this. This is, oh, it's almost lewd how intense erosion can get on trails. I mean, it's disgusting, just filthy. Guys only want one thing, and it's disgusting. Okay, so gully erosion is the end game for this cycle, and the problem is this is the step that makes this self-reinforcing, this positive reinforcement cycle happen, okay? So where we once had armored, soft, organic covered soil surface that could infiltrate water, that had low bulk density, and could deal with water naturally, as it has been doing in this arbitrary spot out in Thompson Woods or your national park or in your mind's eye, wherever it is. It's been doing this for thousands of years, right? Like, this is just a spot. Now we've turned it into a stream bed. And so in this particular spot in the forest or the meadow or wherever this is, this gully now adds flowing water to the system where we didn't have to deal with flowing water before. So any leaves that fall into this concentrated flow path spot can now be carried away immediately the next time it rains. Any pulverized organic material that happens to blow or flow or just fall into this spot, this stuff floats, right? It's very, very easy for the minimum amount of kinetic energy to get water to move. It's way easier to move this stuff than it is to move water. All right, so now we've come full circle. Let's go in our mind's eye now to season 2. And maybe we don't even have any more recreation impacts, right? So for 1 year, we have people moving through a spot, and it creates this sort of visitor-created path area and so forth. And then we realize there's a problem. We're doing overwinter trail maintenance and stuff, and this area is bad, but we don't have time to get to it right now, so we'll just close off this area from hiking, and we go away, and we forget about it. Well, the gully's already there. So we don't need more trampling because we're already breaking up and in particular removing whole or pulverized organic armor from the soil column in this spot. Okay? And the rest of the cycle is free to go now. So in a lot of places, even just across the Shawnee National Forest, there are old hiking paths, old farm roads, for example, that are incised something like 12, 15, 18 feet deep, like multiple meters deep and multiple meters wide, and they are never going to go away because that is now a stream bed. So if you have like a bluff and a road, as we often have all across the Shawnee National Forest, a road going along that bluff, kind of iso-elevationally, sort of following the imaginary topo line on the map, right? And to the extent that that road is subsided or they haven't cut drainage into it because nobody's maintained this road in a century or whatever, right? We have a drainage ditch now that is draped across this entire thing, and it's going to drain all the water to whatever escape point that road does provide. So it's going to add a whole bunch of water transport and drainage and sediment transport to that one exit point. And all of the rest of the downslope ecosystem everywhere else below that road is now dried out. And we're looking at major composition changes. Like over a century, changing the forest structure. right? We're drying things out. So instead of like an oak hickory bottomland hardwood system, could you imagine more of a mesic, scrubby, earlier successional system that can handle being dried out from that, right? So maple, beech, stuff like that. So think about that. We put a trail in wrong, or we have visitors who are creating trails maybe that we don't even know about yet because we just haven't been out there to find them. Or we put in a road wrong, or we inherit a national park that's created by Congress and it has a bunch of old roads and stuff like that. Like, man, this is not a natural hydrologic regime. Purely because of this self-reinforcing cycle. Okay? So, as nerdy and as dumb as this is a powerful driving dynamic for everything that sits on top of soils, which is everything in your national park. All right? So it's hard to overstate the impact, the power, the importance of what we're looking at right here. And it's so important we have modeling clay. So go ahead and open up your modeling clay packet here. And for everyone's emotional health, I sincerely hope that this is not the first time you've played with modeling clay since like elementary school art class, right? This is good for your soul and good for your learning. Never say I didn't love you. All right. Everybody got a little bit of clay? I don't think there's any actual like clay in this whatsoever. It's some kind of air whipped polymer or something, this air dry nonsense. They don't make clay like they used to anymore. That's okay. All right, so gotta roll it into a ball, pull it out into a sheet. It is malleable and ductile. And just take a second to reconnect with the earth. All right, everybody got it? Cool. All right, roll it into a ball, and then I want you to kind of press form it into a triangular prism shape. So looking at it from the side, we want it to be kind of a triangle shape, but with some width. So when you look at it from the front, it should look kind of like a rectangle with a sloped face. When you look at it from the side, it should look like kind of a triangle. Everybody tracking with me so far? All right, hands up if this is the weirdest class you've had all week. Maybe? Okay. All right. Cool. Happy Halloween, everybody, by the way. All right, and see if you can make it kind of blocky like this. We don't want a real thin triangle. We want it to be kind of, we want it to have the chonk level of, oh Lord, he coming. All right, big and blocky and thick. Good? Okay. This is our hill slope. In terms of geometry, if you put this on your open hand or on the desk, the contact patch between the clay and your hand or the desk, this is the run, all right? So how long this is in the direction of the slope along the x-axis, the flat axis, horizontal axis, is the run. And then, of course, how tall it is off of your palm or off of the surface of the desk, that's the rise. And so the slope of the slope of the landform here, our little hill slope, that's going to be the hypotenuse of our little right triangle we formed otherwise. So far, so good? Cool. All right. Now, use your finger or a pencil or what have you. What we're going to do is we're going to press in from the side. If you remember from Monday's class session, a full bench trail. So the entire width of the trail is in. We're not creating any, we're not piling anything on the downslope side to create any of that. So, create a little notch. You don't have to worry about relaxing the upslope side, right? It can be just a little bite. Okay? So, when viewed from the side, or viewed in profile, or viewed in cross-section, those are all the same thing. We have sort of a triangular, really fat, puffy L shape, yeah? Okay, this is our full bench trail, which is running parallel to the contour, the elevation line. This is an iso elevational trail. It's flat. As you're walking along this trail, you're not going up a slope, you're not going down a slope. It's iso elevational. Okay? Now, either in your mind's eye or with your cup of coffee or Monster Energy drink, if you hate life, or drool if you just had work done on your teeth today. Imagine a water droplet hitting anywhere on the upslope side of your newly created full bench iso elevational contour trail. That was so many words to say. Drop water and let it roll down past the flat trail. Can you see how the water would start up here and then go down here and not really get stuck on the trail? Yep. Okay. Now, use your little finger and poke subsidence into the surface of your trail so that the surface of the trail is no longer flat, even though the trail itself, as it's running, is still iso-elevational or flat. Okay? What we're talking about here is called microtopography, or a micro-watershed. So for a section of trail that is 5 feet long, or 2 meters long, right? 6.5 feet long. If that particular little section of the trail is subsided out like this, like there's a little divot or a notch where water that's intercepted by the surface of the earth as it falls, as precipitation, it flows overland down past this spot, and then it gets stuck right here, instead of being able to flow down out of the system because our trail has subsided, right? I'm exaggerating mine a little bit so you can see it, right? So water cannot flow uphill. It will not flow past this little ditch that it's in, that our trail has become, okay? This is what I'm talking about with subsidence. This is what I'm talking about this past Monday when I mentioned the term water getting entrained or captured. Okay. Normally the water wants to flow straight down a slope, so we add a divot for recreation management purposes in the shape of a trail, and hopefully the water can still flow. It'll hit the trail, but continue flowing down. Instead, now this water is entrained. Okay? All right. Go ahead and Trailpocalypse. Go ahead and reset your surface of the planet here as modeled by this little bit of clay. Okay. Back to our little triangular shaped prism. Now, instead of running an iso-elevational trail, it warms my shriveled, dead old man heart to see you guys smiling and enjoying playing with modeling clay. This is my gift to you. Enjoy. All right. Get back to our undisturbed hill slope here. And now with your finger or pen or lollipop stick or whatever you have, your trail working tool of any type, I want you to put a trail running straight down the slope. Okay? Essentially running vertically if you're looking at the face of the slope, straight up and down. So right up to the top of our ridge line here up top, flowing all the way down to the bottom, our valley system down below. Okay? Now, this is not an iso-elevational trail. This is all of the elevation, right? So we're not moving forward or back, except straight up and down the slope. Now, imagine that same water droplet hitting up at the top and flowing down. Is it entrained? This is kind of a trick question. Is the water droplet that hits at the top and flows down to the bottom, is this a trail that can entrain that water? Can it capture that water? What do you think? So let's say a water droplet falls right at the top, like hits in the middle of the trail, and then flows right down, along the trail down to the bottom. That is an entrained water droplet, because all trails have a little bit of subsidence, right? It's got that little characteristic dip shape or swale shape in there. Okay, that concentrated flow path. This is a stream bed. Channel morphologically, this is literally a stream bed. Okay. Now, you just got finished saying that channelized water is water that can flow fast because it doesn't have a whole lot of obstacles to hit. In fact, it's got so much energy, it can take those obstacles and fill in with dirt in front of that obstacle and sort of ramp over it, or it can physically grab that obstacle and drag the obstacle down stream. So for those of you who went on our field trip, did we have to negotiate any curves in the river which had fairly large flow obstacles like whole ass trees? Yeah, we did. Water is that powerful, okay? And this is also playing out along every meter of every trail, everywhere, until the heat death of the universe, because water isn't choosing anything here. It is just following the path of least resistance from high potential to high kinetic energy, all right? And that high kinetic energy is reinforcing this process. Okay, cool. All right, so we have two opposite extremes now, and we have, let's add to this system a little thing called human motivation. We've talked a few times about this semester, where we have parking lots typically down at the bottom of the mountain, because that's where our roads and our cities and all that stuff are. And then we've got pretty cool stuff happening up top, like vista points and campsites and beautiful sunsets and all kinds of stuff up there. So the goal for a lot of people is going to be to get from the bottom to the top. Okay. All right. Reset your little triangle one more time. And now with some combination of trail that doesn't change elevation very much, it's mostly flat, which doesn't get us closer to the top of the mountain at all. Right? If we have a conical mountain and a trail that never gains or loses elevation, it only can circle the mountain. It cannot climb to the top. Right? Now, if we have a trail that runs directly from the parking lot at the bottom up to that spot up at the top, we have satisfied the human motivation. And we have created the absolutely worst ecological situation here. All of our water bodies down below this are going to be covered in silt. All of our moisture-dependent ecosystems, maybe our wildflower meadows like at Tuolumne, like we were talking about on Monday, they're going to be pretty well screwed if we have trails running straight from the bottom straight to the top, or that are entraining water and moving it way to the side. So go ahead and this time make another triangular prism, but this time make it really, really wide. So take that triangle we had before, kind of stretch it out. So still a triangle in profile as viewed from the side, a right triangle viewed from the side. But lots of space left to right. Cool. you to make a trail that runs from the bottom, any point along the bottom edge, to any one point along the top edge. And I want you to do it in a way that doesn't entrain any water and move it too far to the side and kill the ecosystems downslope. And I want you to do it in a way that doesn't approach the summit or the ridgeline so directly that we create a stream bed, which is also entrained water. We call trails that run straight down the slope, specifically mathematically along that least distance path from top to bottom, like straight along the hypotenuse of this triangle. We call that a fall line trail in the business, because this is how you get waterfalls in the real world. You have water running straight down the slope. It is always crossing every topo line that it crosses at a 90-degree angle. It's straight down the slope, a fall line trail. And so at any point where the geology creates sort of a sheer drop, you get a waterfall right there, okay? And then the stream resumes down slope from that, okay? So if you think back to our Haleakala case study, we had a 10,000-foot mountain. We had observatory and a visitor center, these tiny little buildings, not to scale, up top. And then we had a road that switchbacks for miles. Okay. Now the length of the road or trail going from the bottom to the top, from the coast at Haleakala up to the summit of the volcano, or from the bottom of your clay to the top of your clay, the length of that line that you use to connect with that polyline, so that curvy line, that you connect from the bottom to the top, its length is dependent on the cosine of the angle. Don't worry, you're not going to have to remember trig. I got you, fam. All right? The length of the trail or road is dependent on the cosine of the angle off of vertical. So, if this slope is 1 mile long from top to bottom, at just the shortest way you can get from top to bottom, if that's 1 mile, and you start the trail and you run the trail straight up the slope, it's going to be a 1 mile long trail. And then if you run a trail that is at 90 degrees off of vertical, it's never going to reach top. And if it's 1% off of horizontal, it's going to have to switch back like 11 billion times to get to the top. It's going to be a really, 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 really long trail. But it's also going to be real similar to that isoelevational trail, the first trail that we made, that doesn't cause any of these erosion, hydrology, vegetation dry out, freshwater biology, stream blowout. We're not killing any of our trout with that trail, and so forth. So, do your best to put in an imaginary trail that runs from, let's say, one bottom corner to the opposite top corner. And you can do it as a straight line, and we'll talk about the consequences of that. You can do it as a zigzag line, like they did at Haleakala, and we'll talk about the consequences of that. You could do it as straight lines with curves, and we'll talk about the consequences of that. These are called climbing turns, and mountain bikers love climbing turns. Mountain bikers hate switchbacks because momentum conservation is a really big deal in bicycling. Okay? So, right away from this exercise, you can see there's an infinite number of combinations of switchbacks, climbing turns, straight sections, just super ridiculous. I'm going to go up the mountain a little bit, and then down the mountain a little bit, and then back up the mountain a little bit more, and down the mountain a little bit, back up, right? There's an infinite combination of turns towards the steeper and turns towards the shallower that get you from our bottom corner up to that opposite top corner, right? Okay. So this is where the science of recreation ecology equips you, the manager, the park ranger, the trail boss, with the knowledge that you need to make an informed and ecologically and budgetarily sustainable decision about what to do. How do we get people from the top to the bottom, or vice versa? And then it moves from science into art. Okay, so we're going to engage all sides of the brain, as archaic as that notion is. We're going to factor in not just the hard, objective, nuts and bolts geometry of a trail with more switchbacks, has more length, and is a shallower steepness. This is a physically easier trail to walk because you're barely walking upslope. Now you're still walking up a very tall slope, but you're giving yourself lots and lots and lots of runway to take off. Okay. Versus if we go straight up the mountain, well, it's a much shorter hike. We might get done a lot faster, we might die faster, but we'll certainly get there in fewer miles of hiking, fewer steps. Okay? And both of those, from a recreation perspective, from the visitor's perspective, totally fine. Good to go. Doesn't matter. All good. How many of you guys have ever been on a trail that just took you straight up the mountain? Anybody been to Great Smoky Mountains National Park? Anybody hiked up from the bottom to the top? There's several trails that go from the bottom of that ridge system right up to the top. There's a son of a bitch of a hike up a mountain called Shuckstack at, I believe, the southern end of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And it's not that many miles. It's like, I don't know, 4 or 5 miles, whatever it is. But you're gaining over a mile in elevation. So the average trail slope is like 20%. The rise, about a mile, over the run of 5 miles, let's say, in round numbers, right? 1 divided by 5, 0.2, 20%. A 20% slope is hard. Okay? Now, nothing is hard for a fit person in their early to mid-20s. Y'all are invincible, right? We could drop you off a cliff and you would just bounce, and it would be fine. But for the rest of us, and I'm pointing the finger at me, the rest of us is me. After you get out of that window of I'm invincible, then a 20% slope is more than just a, gosh, whew, I'm kind of winning. Let me stop for a sec here. It's like I don't know if this is safe for me. Like, there are a lot of people who are going to look at that hike up Shuckstack and go, you know what? I could literally die of a heart attack. And they wouldn't be wrong, is the thing. So, we want to balance this absolutely inescapable thing. There is no conscious choice, there's no human volition or decision in this soil impact cycle. We want to balance that against, if we make a trail that is very, very, very easy and very, very, very long and very, very respectful of this soil impact cycle, and it's not going to cause this as much as possible because it's nearly a flat trail, we got to balance that against, some people want to go straight up the mountain, like jog up the mountain, like put one of those firefighter weight training vests and like jog up the mountain. And not every time I go to Great Smokies, but most times I'll see somebody. One time I saw a guy, it was in like November in the Smokies. I don't even remember why I was there because it's not a great time of year to be in the Smokies. But he was trail running up the trail to Clingman's Dome. He was smoking a cigar and carrying a fully loaded World War II Alice pack. Right? He was doing his own version of the pack test. Because, fuck you, that's why I don't know. Right? Like, there's always going to be somebody, right? That's the human motivation side of it. And that guy's not wrong for doing that, right? It's important for us to be able to challenge ourselves. It's important for us to be able to try for something and maybe not even get it the first 50 times that we try. The poet Robert Browning once wrote, "I but a man's reach should exceed his grasp, else what is heaven for?" Right? There's got to be stuff that we can try for that we can't necessarily just automatically grab and take home and accomplish and win. Otherwise, there's nothing left to do. There's nothing left to challenge us. Okay? So, let's pack up our stuff. Hang on to your leg. And let's head outside over towards Thompson Woods and kind of look for some real-world examples of literally just this stuff. And we'll keep on making more examples. All right, so if you have a trail that goes from one end to the other while you're packing up, show me. Show me what you got. Reference. My eyes are bad. What you got? There you go. I hiked that trail. Anybody else? That's all right. All right. We can remake them. It's okay. All right, let's head outside.